Welcome everyone to the 7th edition of the hashtag Slinkythink sessions. My name is Drew Kinchis. I am the creative director at BeLife. Hope you all are having a splendid Wednesday so far. Before I get into today's topic, I'd like for us to break the ice super quickly. So if you all can just share with me a quick little icebreaker here. If you could travel anywhere in the world, where would you go? If you go ahead and put your answer in the chat. And I'd also like to know, why would you go there as well? What would entice you to travel somewhere? So for me, I'm going to say Anfield, which is where Liverpool, the soccer club, play, to see them play a match because they just won the Champions League, which if you're into soccer, you will have some idea of what I'm talking about. If you have no idea what the heck I'm talking about, then so be it. But Jenny mentioned Hawaii. I've heard it's pretty nice. Got married there. So as your answers start coming in for our fun little icebreaker here, I'm really excited about today's session because we hear from a lot of individuals. I'm a remote worker and I work at a couple of different co-working facilities here in Indianapolis. And when I talk to individuals about what BeLife, our organization, does, a lot of people like to respond and say, well, our team is Agile-ish or Scrum-ish. And there's a variety of reasons why teams only adopt maybe one or two events or one or two different aspects of agility or Scrum, whatever it may be. And that's what we're going to be talking about today for our webinar. Is I'm going to provide you with some quick and easy and also very free options to be able to foster Scrum within your remote teams. So the reason I asked you this question of if you could travel anywhere in the world, where would you go? If you've been to any of my webinars before, you know that I like to ask an icebreaker that not only gives me a what answer, but also a why answer. And I love your responses so far. A lot of you are saying Europe. Don Miller says he likes Jurgen Klopp. That's the manager for the Liverpool team. So heck yeah to that. These kind of icebreakers allow us to get to know each other a little bit better. And one of the things that makes managing a remote team or being a remote employee within a remote environment is if we don't feel connected to one another, past what our title and what we do for a living, we're just not going to be emotionally connected to the work itself. And so as we're going through the different modules today, and as I'm going through some of these different steps of how to develop Scrum, don't forget that people are still people. And although we need our team members to produce and to come through for us and create results, it's really, really important that we make sure that we continue to, as I said, treat people like people, and that we don't overlook their needs as human beings. So, okay, a little bit about us. We are BeLife. BeLife is a sentence. Life is a synonym for Agile. So we are basically asking everyone to be Agile. So our organization, we help with training and coaching, whether it be larger organizations that are looking to scale their Agile efforts or smaller organizations that are looking to just get started with Agile. So as I mentioned just a second ago, life just means agile, flexible, or transparent. We are driven by helping teams and individuals be the best they can be, and we do this by introducing Agile methodologies and people-focused practices. So I always ask this question at the beginning of my webinars. If you all can place in the chat just a yes or no if you all are using Agile in some sort of capacity in your workplace, whether it be Scrum or Scrumban or maybe Kanban. If you have no idea what I'm talking about with any of these terms, just simply put no, and that will help me either way. All right, let's introduce the team. So my name is Drew Kinchis. I'm the creative director here at BeLife. Chris Daly is our managing director. He's the head honcho, so to speak. I call him the boss because he hates being called the boss. And we have 2 new additions since last time we had one of our lovely webinars. We're really excited to introduce Todd Adams, who's a certified Scrum Master, who's going to be coming on to help us with our Agile transformations and so on and so forth, and deliver programming. And then also we have a Tech Point extern with us for the summer, Karishma Dhingra, and she will be with us this summer to learn about what we're doing and also to grow her skill set as well. So suddenly the team of 2 is expanded to 4. So how exciting. Okay, so why y'all here today? The goal of the workshop is to reinforce what Scrum is, why it matters, and how you can sustainably adopt it within remote teams. So most of you, because I'm seeing from the responses I'm getting here, that it seems like most of you are Agile to some degree or using Scrum. Jenny mentioned their team is Agile-ish, so it sounds like they're in a perfect place to be taking this webinar right now. But even if you're doing this already and you feel like you have a pretty good grasp on it, I think it's always important to just take a moment to review all the events and to review the framework of what Scrum is, to just make sure that you're not missing anything. Or maybe perhaps there's a couple of tips that I can provide for you today that you can bring back to your teams and say, oh, this is something that we used to do, or maybe we're not doing as much as we could be. So this workshop is really designed for teams, remote teams who, once again, maybe aren't Agile all the way, who are thinking about being Agile, or maybe aren't Agile at all. So whether or not you're really Agile or just a little bit, I hope you get something out of today's workshop. And I'm going to be covering a lot of specific steps of how to get a team set up with using Scrum. So I'm excited. I hope you all are excited as well. If anybody's excited, maybe put like a smiley face in the chat, just to confirm the excitement for today's webinar. Woohoo. Okay, I got a woohoo. That's all I need. That's perfect. Okay. So today's agenda, Agile 101. We're going to cover what Agile is as a methodology, its origins, and why it's different from traditional project management. Number 2, Scrum Essentials, a crash course in Scrum, which is of course, a framework within Agile. And then those first 2 modules I'm going to go through pretty quickly. And the great thing is there will be a video replay of this afterwards. So I don't need you to take every single note of every single thing that I'm saying. It's going to be probably a little bit overwhelming for some of you. But I want you to just take in as much as you can with 1 and 2. And then number 3 is where I'm actually going to show you how to set up Scrum and to do it in a way that anybody can get started. So we're going to be using specifically Trello and Slack just to show you how the flow works. And this system can be used, Scrum can be used in Trello, it can be used in Jira. There's all kinds of different programs that will allow you to be able to adopt Scrum into your workplace. But I think this is a really, really great place to start if you haven't adopted it yet. And then we don't claim to have all the answers, so that's a good thing. We want you to we want your curiosity to be piqued from today's workshop. So if you leave with more questions and answers, that is totally fine. I will be flattered if that's such the case. Okay, so today we're talking about the basics of Scrum and how we can get our teams to be more Agile, our remote teams. So it's hard for me to know what I'm trying to help you with if I don't know what you need help with. So let's start off with, in the chat, if you can write a sentence or 2 for me about what in your remote teams frustrates you about collaboration. So it could be maybe a lack of quality technology that makes it difficult to join. I saw someone had a little bit of trouble joining the webinar today. It's a pretty common thing that technology sometimes doesn't work. Are you having trouble with people being able to express themselves fully? Just write a couple sentences and let me know what are some things that are frustrating you right now in your remote teams. So Huma just put to get them to talk. And that's a great example. Remote employees, if they're not in the same physical environment as you are, it can certainly be challenging. And there's I think an added degree of difficulty for remote teams. Now I'm using that term remote teams as a pretty broad stroke of saying any team that has at least one individual who's a remote employee is a remote team. And I believe that that's to be true. So even if you have a team of 50 people and they all work in the same physical environment, and you have one person who's a remote employee, I think it's very, very important to make sure that you are addressing yourselves as a remote team, because that's true. But it's a little bit different when you have a physical environment with one remote employee versus having an entire team which is remote. And today's workshop is going to be applicable to both scenarios. Christina puts, they struggle with getting information and then side conversations between people, and it never gets communicated to the rest of the team. Yep, that's a really good example. I'm going to show you how you can facilitate those one-on-ones, as I call them, and do it in a way where it's not distracting for the rest of the team. So I'm glad you brought that up as well. People not engaged in conversations because they can sneakily multitask. That is a great response. And my biggest suggestion to fight the person who's not fully engaged in what's going on is to use video, which is ironic because I'm not using video right now. But when you have these meetings with your teams, and we'll talk about these different events you want to have within Scrum, it's very important that you use video as much as possible, because there's a lot of nuances that you will miss if you do not see each other and see the nonverbal communication that's happening. So thanks for sharing. All right, let's pop into Agile 101. So this is going to be a very brief overview of what defines Agile. So let's start with traditional project management. So as the slide says here, the waterfall method to managing projects, you complete work in stages. You do not move to another stage until you have completed the work in the previous stage. Now, if you look at these examples here, requirements, design, development, testing, and deployment, these are all terms that are used within software development. And originally, Agile was created to be used in software development. What I love about Scrum and Kanban and all these different frameworks that are under the Agile umbrella is that I really truly believe that these can be used in any industry and any team if you embrace the transparency, the accountability, and the trust that comes with it. So if you see some terms and they're not applicable to your exact industry, don't worry about it. The idea will still be there and you'll still get something out of it. So if you look at these stats for traditional waterfall management, only 29% of projects, and this is at the conclusion of the project, are successful. 52% are challenged and 19% fail. So what do these terms actually mean? Well, successful simply means that it met all three of the triple constraints. So that would be cost, schedule, and scope. Challenged means that a project would have met 2 out of the 3 constraints. So let's say it was delivered on time and it was on budget, but it didn't have the desired scope. So for example, if you were, so I've actually created an entire Trello board for you to all interact with and see in action today. And it's, I did a week in the life of me preparing for today's webinar. So an example of that would be, if I delivered the workshop on time today, that's great. I didn't spend any money on it, so the budget's there. But if I only, let's say, cover 2 of the 3 modules that I wanted to, then that wouldn't be the desired scope. So that would be a challenged project. And then 19% of projects are failed, which means that it is canceled before it's completed, or it's completed and not used, which is always a worst case scenario, to put all that time and energy into something. And then at the end of the day, it's not even used because it's not what the client or the customer or whoever it is actually wants to use, which is a huge bummer. So the reason I bring up these waterfall project stats is traditionally in waterfall management, we see that, a manager tells another manager what to do. And a lot of what the team decides to do is because someone tells them to do that. And one of the biggest powerful aspects of, one of the most powerful aspects of Agile is the fact that the team has the power to decide what they're going to be doing next and how they're going to do it, which is really awesome. So the Agile Manifesto, and I'm actually going to, if you all haven't been to this website yet, it's probably one of my favorite websites ever, because I don't think it's changed since 2001 when it was created. So I'm putting a link in the chat right now, and this has the webpage for the original Agile Manifesto. And as you can see, if you've clicked on the link, this website is old, and it's not really even a website, it's just a web page. I wouldn't go as far as say that it is a website. But if you look here, if you boil these down, these principles down, it really comes down to 4 different aspects here, which we're prioritizing individuals and interactions over processes and tools. We're prioritizing working software over comprehensive documentation. We're prioritizing customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and we're responding to change over following a plan. Now, this is going to make a little bit more sense as I go through today's webinar, but these are the tenets of what makes Agile, Agile. And the reason why this is so important is it's not a prescriptive way of doing things. Now, I'm going to go through some different events and some different roles today to get your heads wrapped around the basics of Scrum, but I am not going to tell you how exactly you should apply these roles and how you should go about it exactly to a T within your teams. So Agile, it's a fundamental shift in thinking, and it's a mindset. Once again, this is not a prescriptive, it's not a recipe that I say, if you just follow this exact recipe, it's going to work. The analogy I like to use, and I don't know if it's a good one, but humor me if it is I like cooking a lot. So if you bake a cake, or if you're a baker, you have to follow the recipe unless you have been baking for a really long time, or what you're creating is not going to come out how you want it to. So if you switch the baking soda with the baking powder in whatever cake you're making, it's not going to come out to be very good. Whereas if you're cooking on, let's say, a grill or on a stovetop, that allows you to be a little bit more iterative. If your pan dries out, you want to add a little bit of water. Or if you taste something and it just is lacking a little bit of oomph, maybe add a little bit of salt, maybe add a little bit of pepper, whatever it may be. So to me, Agile is this sort of like stovetop cooking, whereas waterfall management is more of that sort of baking sort of idea. And it's lunchtime, so all I'm doing is thinking about food, so forgive me on that. I'm not going to go through all of these right here, the 12 guiding Agile principles, but I want you, if you look at the replay later, I want you to just take a look at these and think about how some of these Agile principles could apply to your team. If you go through this webinar and get no value out of this at all and say, we're just not ready to start with utilizing Scrum, we don't even know how we can make this happen, just take a look at some of these principles and maybe just think about considering 1 or 2 of these. Even the idea of like a self-organizing team can be very, very powerful, even if you're not fully adopting Scrum. So the reason why Agile has really picked up a lot of steam and why we're excited about it is that this allows us to be faster about how we are creating products and just to be more iterative and to be more responsive to what our customers need. So like for instance, the changing requirements section here, which I misspelled the word requirements, that is a great example of if I was able to take a little bit extra time and have the rest of my team, let me put it this way, a requirement for me is to spell things correctly. And so if I'm able to be a little bit more adaptive in that situation and have a team look at it instead of just myself looking at it, we're going to get better results. It's difficult to forecast when work will be delivered. This is a great, I mention this to people a lot, in that the Friday afternoon blues tends to be, I started work on Monday morning at 8 a.m. and when I hit 5 p.m. on Friday, if those are your work hours, I had an expectation what I thought I was going to get done, and then I didn't really get there. And so that's always frustrating, and it feels like you've been a letdown to your team because you haven't gotten everything done you want to get done. So this allows you to be more predictable and be more realistic and honest about what you can get done by Friday. Agile is not a magical solution. It's not a silver bullet. Once again, if you have an organization that's just not working as efficiently as it possibly could, You just don't get to apply Agile magically and things are fixed. Agile allows you to consistently look at what you're doing, whether it be every week or every 2 weeks, and adapt. Instead of saying we are going to work a certain way and we're only going to review this every 6 weeks or maybe every month, it allows you to get better faster. Quality sucks if the product that you're creating or if the service you're providing just isn't up to snuff. Agile, because of its transparency and its honesty amongst all the team members, is certainly going to help you out with creating a higher quality product. And then customer demands, we have to move fast. And it's just back to that changing requirements, that requirements that are given to us from customers and clients can change very quickly, but also just the competitive nature of whatever industry you're in, you've got to move quickly. So once again, another benefit to Agile. I won't go through this slide too much, but Agile also identifies these three sort of, I would call them intrinsic motivators for why people do the work that they do. You know, people want to have purpose, people want to have autonomy, and people want to become a master of what they're doing. And so looking at all these different bullet points on this slide, you can tell that as we go through today's workshop, a lot of what I'm talking about is going to fuel these three ideas of purpose, autonomy, and mastery, and that we really want to make sure that our employees are at least hitting two of these three, and that they're always working towards all three at all times. As I mentioned before, one of the biggest aspects of Agile that I love is that the team regularly reflects on how to become more effective, and then they adjust. So this is not what I think, what you think. This is as the team comes together and communicates, that we're all able to make something better because we're all appreciating each other's input. So once again, if you're used to Agile, if you've done this before, this just might be a nice little refresher, a nice review. But we're going to hop into Scrum now. And we're going to talk about what it is, its process, and its roles. So the definition of Scrum, if you look it up in the dictionary, it is a set of practices used in Agile project management that emphasizes daily communication and the flexible reassessment of plans that are carried out in short iterative phases of work. That is true, but however, this is not a real emotionally, how do I say it? I don't read this and get terribly motivated to start using Scrum based on this textbook definition. One thing I like to mention to people is that Scrum is also not an acronym. Scrum describes the idea that, as in rugby, the scrum, as they're jockeying for position with one another, they're trying to get other people out of the way so that someone can go in and get the ball and then run with it. And so that's the idea behind Scrum, right? Is that we're trying to get blockers out of the way that are impeding the progress of our team members and helping them to be more effective and more dynamic. So here's the entire Scrum process. There will not be a pop quiz at the end of this webinar, especially if you're eating. I don't want you to be stressed and have to be writing all these things down while you're enjoying your lunch. But this gives you a nice little overview of what we're going to be talking about with the Scrum process. And we're going to refer to this to a few different times as I go through today's webinar. But the thing I want you to notice is that there are 4 different areas for feedback. If you notice that there are 4 different stickies or Post-its, whatever you want to call it. I guess I should say sticky because Post-it's a trademarked item. But feedback loop is in 4 different sections here on the Scrum process. And this is one of the driving factors of what makes Scrum really work, is this continuous feedback. We're not making decisions based on hunches or purely on data. We are making decisions of how we're going to move forward and how we're going to change the work that we're doing based on the actual work that we're doing. So let's talk about Scrum roles really fast. So there are 3 main roles within Scrum. There's the product owner, the Scrum master, and the team. So the product owner is responsible for the product and driving product success. They represent and speak for the business needs of the project by creating and sharing the vision of the project. And the reason why they use the term product owner is that this person owns the product. They owned the end result of, it's their responsibility that the end result is what it should be. So they're going to be a big part of the vision of what this product should be. And they want to make sure that the team, all the individuals within the team, understand what journey they're going to be taking to get to the end result of this desirable product. As you can see here, they're a member of the Scrum team. They bridge the gap between the customers, the stakeholders, and the Scrum team itself, which is, once again, I mentioned, is really important because we want the Scrum team to be, we want them to have a little bit of insulation, and that we don't want the Scrum team to be getting input from all different kinds of stakeholders and different individuals who can impede their progress and provide them with 16 different types of opinions all at the same time, which can be pretty jarring. They're going to be working daily with the Scrum team to clarify requirements. They create a shared vision, and they decide what the project or product does and does not include. This will make a little bit more sense as I go through how these roles are going to interact with the Trello board that I've created for remote teams. But the product owner, as I said earlier, they're going to be developing the product vision, strategy, and direction. They own the product backlog, and I'll explain a little bit about what that is in just a second. And then working with the team, they are going to consistently, the big takeaway from that section is that they're conveying the product needs to the team, and they're going to accept or reject the completed work at the end of the sprint. So the second role is a Scrum Master. So the Scrum Master is responsible for ensuring that Scrum is understood and enacted while supporting the team. Scrum Masters do this by acting as a coach, ensuring that the Scrum team adheres to Scrum theory, practices, and rules. So they are a member of the Scrum team. They work daily with the Scrum team. This is the biggest takeaway, is that they act as a servant leader. This is such a buzzword right now, servant leadership. And there's another workshop that we host called Management 3.0, and it talks about how the idea of Management 1.0 is that a manager simply tells people what to do. The idea of Management 2.0 is that a manager says, oh, you have autonomy to do what you need to do, but they're still the ones that make the final decision on what's happening. Management 3.0 is saying you are managing the process instead of the people, and you're truly letting your team members make decisions that are going to impact where you're going moving forward. And instead of the Scrum Master coming in and saying, hey, I think you should do this, I think you should do that, I like to think of this person as a manager or a coach. I was just mentioning my fondness for Liverpool Football Club. Jurgen Klopp, who's their manager, even if they were getting smoked by another team, he would never go onto the pitch and actually start playing, because that's not his role. His role is when the team needs help, he's going to provide guidance when they seek it out. If the team is playing really well and they're up 3-0, 4-0, he's probably going to be pretty hands-off and say, yeah, it seems like everything's going pretty well. So truly acting as a servant leader is very, very important. The role is focused on enablement, not accountability. And then lastly, they act as a change agent. So the big takeaways from what they're going to be doing during the actual sprint within Scrum, they're going to be discovering techniques for effective product backlog management. And the product backlog, I'll explain this a little bit more, is simply what are we doing during the sprint? You know, what are all the things we need to do? And then we're going to zone that into a sprint backlog, which is what we're going to be doing within a certain amount of time, which is called the sprint. They're going to be coaching and teaching practices in agility. So they're going to be as it says here, they're evangelizing Scrum. So they need to be very, knowledgeable about what Scrum is and the idea behind it, to make sure that everyone on the team is doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then they remove impediments to the team's progress. This is huge. We're going to talk about the daily Scrum, which I think, once again, if you don't take anything from today's workshop and you decide to not be super agile, or if you're not ready to just go into Scrum, just having a daily Scrum and talking about what did you do yesterday, what did you do today, and what's in your way is a great way to start off the day and to get people on the same page. So that's one of their biggest roles as well. And then I would argue the most important role within Scrum is the team, because these are the people that are truly doing the majority of the work. So what makes a good team member within Scrum? They're going to work collaboratively. They're going to be independent. They're going to take initiative. They're going to share knowledge freely. They're going to enjoy learning new skills. And they're going to understand how to work through impediments. What's important is that we are, excuse me, open and honest with things that are getting in our way. But we don't just say, well, I have a couple of blockers. I have a couple of things that are preventing me from getting some work done. I'm just going to stop working. It's important that members of the team are creative to figure out ways to get around these blockers. But if there are a couple of things that are getting in their way at the moment, that they figure out a way to continue to work and provide the efforts that they need to get to the finished product. Okay, so here's the fun stuff. I know we've spent a little bit of time going through just the basics of Agile and the basics of Scrum, but this is the part of today's webinar I'm really, really excited about, because I think for some of you who are doing the Agile-ish or Scrum-ish, you'll get a lot out of this. And well, first off, let's start off with another little, I call them emotional exorcisms. So I asked you earlier, what's frustrating about collaboration within your remote teams? And this question's a little bit different, but I'd like to know, I asked earlier what you are struggling with or what's a personal frustration you have, but what are some of the challenges that your remote teams are having right now? Is it being able to coordinate when everyone's going to meet at the same time? Or is it that it takes too long for people to get clearance or to get these, as I mentioned earlier, blockers addressed for the team to move forward? If you can just put a sentence or two in the chat and let me know what are a couple of things that your remote teams are struggling with. If everything is perfect, excuse me, something in my throat. If everything is perfect within your remote team, then good for you. I'm happy for you. Okay, so while you're writing down some of the struggles that your remote teams are having right now, and as I see those coming in, this is my favorite slide. This is the aha moment time. This is what you came for today's webinar. Is I'm going to show you specifically how you can quickly and easily set up Scrum using a lot of free programs. And once again, as I mentioned earlier, if you are already using Scrum within your remote team, I would highly suggest to review these events that I'm mentioning and just make sure that you're actually doing these to a T and that you are holding yourself accountable to make sure that you're doing, that you're running the correct kind of cadence with these events that I'm going to mention. So the key to moving from Scrum-ish to Scrummable, which is a word I made up, is consistency. There are a lot of times where, and I will admit that I've done this personally as well within our team in BeLight, where I get excited about certain aspects within the Scrum framework, and because I get busy or because some variables change within our team, I unfortunately let that be an excuse for not consistently delivering my daily Scrum or truly being engaged in a retrospective or even attending a retrospective at all. And so what I'm going to talk about moving forward for the rest of this webinar is I think it's really important that we make it as easy as possible to participate in these Scrum events, because the harder it is to participate, the less likely people are going to want to do it. And they're just going to say, man, this is way, way too much work. I just can't do it. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the principles of the Agile Manifesto is that we want working software over comprehensive documentation. Now that's talking about we want to deliver working software instead of saying, well, we would be able to deliver a functional program now, but we really want to make sure we document the whole process, make sure we document everything we put into it. So it's going to take another couple of months. Well, that documentation doesn't really provide you with any value. And so I bring that up because I really want this to be to me, the working software aspect of that phrase is why I created this webinar, because I just want you to see how all this can work and how you can easily adopt Scrum, whether it be professionally or even in your personal life as well. So we're going to be using Trello and Slack. They're going to be the backbone of our operations today. And these are the 4 main Scrum events that you're going to participate in when adopting Scrum. First is the sprint planning, then it's the daily Scrum, then a sprint review, and then a sprint retrospective. So what I'm going to be doing is going through all these different events first. I'm going to go through all the slides, and then I'm going to switch over to my Trello board, and I'll show you how all this looks like within Trello, and then also how you can use Slack for some of these events as well. So going back to that Scrum process chart, this is what the sprint looks like. So a product backlog it's where you're getting started. These are all of the tasks that you need to complete within the project or the task that you have at hand. And I'll talk about how you want to scope this product backlog in just a little bit. But you're going to start off with sprint planning, as you see here first, and then you're going to work on the sprint. And you can see that there's this loop here with the sprint, and that's where that daily Scrum is happening within the sprint. And then you're going to hop back, and you either deliver the product at the end, which is the box at the end, or if it's not ready, then you come back up, excuse me, and just go back to sprint planning and start another sprint. So I love this slide because I've actually heard this from a couple individuals who are not a huge fan of Scrum, and they say, well, we tried it, but when we tried it, we just were stuck in meetings all the time, and all we did was meet and meet and meet and meet. And I'm sure all of you have worked in environments, been part of organizations where it feels like you're just going from one meeting to the next meeting to the next meeting. And you might ask yourself at the end of the day, like, how much work did I actually get done? And so this is really important to remember, that when you're going through a sprint, that these meetings are still a very small part of the work that you're going to be doing. And the only reason why meetings would take over your sprints and why it would just turn into meeting after meeting after meeting is because you're not exercising the discipline that is needed within these sprints. And I'm going to set up some guidelines for you of how you can make sure that you're actually spending the majority of your time working and not just talking to one another. So we're going to start off with sprint planning. So I would suggest that you set up a call at the beginning of the week, and the rule that you want here is that you want the sprint meeting to be 45 minutes per hour per 1 week of sprint. So when I say sprint, just decide on how long do you want this. The sprint, all you're doing is you're deciding how long are we going to work and then reassess. So here at Be Life, we do 1 week sprints. A lot of organizations do 2 week sprints. You can do 4 week sprints if you want, but don't extend it out past then, because if you're just doing a 2 month sprint, you're not allowing for a quick enough time frame to be able to be iterative, interact with one another. So with sprint planning, it's very, very important to pick a time that everyone can sign up for, because it's really important that everybody's at the sprint planning event all at the same time. So the sprint planning, these are some 4 basic guidelines to how to do this. So you're going to want to set a time limit on this. And as I mentioned earlier, it should be time boxed. You're going to want to spend 45 minutes per hour, 45 minutes per week of a sprint. So if you had a 2 week sprint, it would be an hour and a half. So you want to make sure that you time box it and make sure that the team has the time it needs to create the product. We don't want to be stuck in meetings all the time. The sprint length. So as I mentioned earlier, just decide on how long the sprint's going to be. Is it going to be 1 week? Is it going to be 2 weeks? It's really important. Pick a day. It's often on the first day of each sprint, which can be on a Monday morning, is when the Scrum team holds the sprint planning meeting. I know that I've heard from a lot of teams that the sprint planning can be fine on a Monday morning, but then if you do a sprint retrospective at 4 o'clock on a Friday, that can be problematic because people, believe it or not, might be a little bit checked out. So consider doing like a Wednesday to Tuesday. I mean, you can do midweeks as a start. Start in the middle of the week and end in the middle of your week as well, if need be. And then bring effort. This is really, really important. A lot of you mentioned this earlier in the chat, that it's really frustrating when people are clearly not involved in the meeting, not engaged in what's happening in the moment. So everyone needs to be dedicated to the effort for the entire meeting. And sorry, I misspoke earlier. The sprint planning meeting, we want to spend 2 hours per week of sprint duration. The 45 minutes per week is the sprint retrospective, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit. So the sprint itself, so we start off with sprint planning. We do that for 2 hours per week, and then we kick right into the actual sprint itself. So really important that we take the product backlog, which if we go back to the sprint planning, it's not letting me go back. Okay, I hope you just memorized it. But if we go to that product backlog at the beginning of sprint planning, that is all the tasks that need to be done, period, to complete a project. So what we're going to do for the sprint backlog is we're going to pull the highest priority items from that backlog to create what we call the sprint backlog. What's really important is that the tasks in Scrum should take 12 hours or less to complete. I mentioned earlier that there's no way you're going to be able to deliver Monday morning at 8 a.m., it's very challenging to know how much work you can get done in 40 hours. And so 12 hours, a day and a half, it's much easier for the human brain to understand what this looks like moving forward. A sprint goal, so a short statement of what the work will be focused on during the sprint. What are we trying to do during this week or 2 weeks? Sprint rules, I'll talk about this when I show you my Trello board about what are the guidelines under which the team members agree to conduct themselves. This isn't what we're working on, but how are we going to work on these projects? And then the definition of done is a huge one. We have to decide what done looks like. And if we all have different ideas of what the finished product looks like, we're not going to be on the same page of where we want to be at the end of the sprint. So the daily Scrum. So we start off with the sprint planning, then we're doing the sprint, right? And then each day we want to do the daily Scrum, which as you can see is, oops. Sorry about that. The daily Scrum is right here. You can see in the middle of the Scrum process. So we're going to be doing this every single day for 15 minutes. And it's simple as this, is 3 questions. What did you do yesterday? What will you do today? And is there anything that is in your way? For the daily Scrum, we want to set a limit. You're going to time box this to 15 minutes, which, yes, that sounds very challenging. And guess what? It is challenging, but you can do it. Team only. This is for the team, not anyone else, for the daily Scrum. Anyone can attend the daily Scrum, but only the team may speak. Others can speak if requested by the team. And then the Scrum Master is going to take these daily Scrums and make sure that when they see these blockers or impediments, that they are the person who is helping the team to move forward and to try to remove these as much as possible. This daily Scrum is not a problem-solving session. The Scrum Master is not required to attend the daily Scrum, but is required to make sure that it occurs. One suggestion I've heard is if you're doing these for 15 minutes at a time, and I love this idea, is that you get question 1 and 2 out of the way first. What did you do yesterday and what will you do today? And then with question 3 to say, is there anything in your way, that you let everybody do 1 and 2 first, each individual, and then you save the third in case some people don't have impediments, because that's most likely to take up the majority of the time for the daily Scrum. So you're going to have a sprint reviews next is your Scrum event. And this is where the team presents what they've accomplished during the sprint to the product owner. So you get to the end of that 2 weeks or 1 week, whatever you decide, and the team, wherever they're at, they're going to demo out where they're at with their product. So what makes the sprint review work is that you need full participation. So you can invite anyone and everyone who may be interested in the product. The Scrum team is going to demo their work and they want to celebrate the good work of the team. You need to time box this to 1 hour per week of sprint duration. And then this is informal. This is not a a pitch. This is not some sort of like Shark Tank, you're fired sort of thing. It is just simply, it's meant to be conversational. It shouldn't be a presentation by any means. And then lastly, we're going to have the sprint retrospective. So this is really important to allow the team to talk to each other honestly and say what's working and what isn't. So here are the questions for the sprint retrospective. What did we do well? What didn't go well? And what actions do we need to take moving forward to fix question 2? And what's really important about the sprint retrospective is this needs to be private. It needs to be within the team, and this is not with any other, this is not where the executive or someone who's higher up gets to come in and say, well, I wish you'd do this differently or do that. This is only within the team itself. So this is done at the very end of the sprint. All Scrum team members can participate. You should track results into what we call user stories, and I'll show you that in just a second. And then this is just a really great time for the team to be honest and inspect itself and create a plan for improvements moving forward. So to see the holistic Scrum process, this is everything together as one. And we've X'd out the manager, project manager, and status meeting. We're not anti-manager necessarily, but when we think about that term, usually managers are telling people what to do, and we love the idea of the team actually being able to do the work. So I'm going to hop back to these slides and go through exactly what I said, but I want to show you, I didn't want to hop back and forth from Trello to the slides. And we're going to go through and talk about how we can actually implement this within the programs that I mentioned. So I'm going to put a link within the chat, and this link is for a Trello board that I have created for all of you to join. I'm also going to go ahead and start sharing the Trello board. Just give me 1 second here. Okay, there we go. Okay, sorry about that, a little technical glitch. So if you can follow that link that I put into the chat, this will get you to the Trello board itself. This is a free program, and this allows you to very quickly be able to create the Scrum framework for your remote teams. So this is how we have our board set up with BeLife, and we are a remote organization. So as I mentioned earlier, you have this product backlog here that you start off with. And to give you an idea, the scope of the project that I'm working with is creating today's webinar. So I'm going to simply start off and put everything in the product backlog that I need to make sure that today's webinar goes smoothly. And I, once again, don't want any of these tasks to be more than 12 hours. We want to keep it under 12 hours because we just can't understand the scope of something that's bigger than that. So starting off with the product backlog here, we can then take some of the items that are on here and move them to the sprint backlog, which is what are we going to be accomplishing this week or two? What are the tasks that we need to do to make this happen? And I put sprint backlog or the week because I like to have it set up personally, and this is just a preference of mine, to where there's a sprint backlog, but I also time box what I'm going to be doing for each day. So like on Monday, I cut down on some slides, and I also developed some graphics. So I put that on Monday. And then yesterday, I did a final post on social media here. So I just create these cards right here as placeholders so we can look at this sprint backlog and to make sure that everybody is Well, like I said, I just spread it out throughout the week so I can be more realistic about what I'm trying to get done on a weekly basis. It looks like, Christina, it looks like you're having a little bit of trouble with the chat. Make sure that you have it set to where you're seeing all panelists. Whoops, all panelists and attendees. There we go. Okay, cool. Just making sure you're getting all that. Fantastic. Okay. All right, so moving on. So we have the week set up here, right? And as we talked about with sprint planning, we're going to want to figure out exactly what we want to get done during the week. So you're going to spend your 2 hours to do that. One thing I would recommend is for your sprint planning, when you decide of when you're going to do this, if you see here in the top right, you have a menu that you can use, and you can use a power up, which is called calendar. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that right now. And the calendar power up. Okay, let me go ahead and reshare. It looks like I haven't seen anybody. Let's try this again. I don't think the link got to you all. So let's try that now. I think I accidentally only sent it to the panelists. Sorry about that. Okay, there we go. I noticed nobody was joining me on Trello, and I thought it was just something I said, or maybe everyone had already taken their post-lunch nap. Okay, so with the sprint planning, as we mentioned, we're going to figure out what we want to put in our sprint backlog, or what the week looks like, right? As I said before, we're going to time box this to 2 hours per week. And we want to make sure each task is 12 hours or less. Make sure that you pick a product owner and a scrum master within your team, especially if you haven't started with this. If your organization is using Scrum already, I'm assuming you already have these roles set up within your team. And then make sure that the product owner, they're going to decide what tasks are actually placed on the sprint. So the product owner's role is going to say which of these things over here are going to pop over to the sprint backlog, so we know what we want to accomplish during the week. So the way the board is set up is pretty simple, right? You have the sprint backlog, which can be set up chronologically like this is with the week as well. And then you have 3 different columns, which are doing, blockers, and done. Now, I put blockers here, but sometimes this is just review and standby. So Don, I see that you're hanging out with us today. So I needed to reschedule lunch delivery because we're also hosting another workshop, and I realized that I wasn't going to be there to pick up food. So if I wanted Don to be the person who was in charge of rescheduling lunch delivery, I could just simply put him on that card. And now I'm saying, hey, Don, I need something to happen, but I need your approval for that, or there's something that's getting in my way. Therefore, you'll get a notification to say, oh, okay, I can take care of it. And that's great. And then we can continue to move forward. The idea, of course, is that we want to keep moving from left to right and making sure that we're seeing everything moving from the product backlog to the sprint backlog, and then going from doing, review, to done. So we want to see this continuous flow moving left to right. A bit of Kanban that I would throw in here is if you put WIP, which is called works in progress, instead of saying I'm going to get 15 things done today, maybe decide on putting a number here and saying I'm only going to have 6 cards. And that allows you to better time box the rest of your day and have more realistic expectations of what you're going to be able to get done. All right, 1 second here, sorry. Okay, so if you have a task that, like, let's say here, I put proofreading slides, and, well, here's a great example. If I say deliver webinar, let's back up. If I'm gonna create a card that says create webinar, and it's too big, that's a really, really big task. So we need to break this down. So we can either say, we can break this down into individual cards, or if we want, we could break this down into a checklist as well. So create webinar would be come up with title, design slides, create event online, just as some examples here. So you can take a larger task that ends up being bigger than 12 hours, and you can break this down into something smaller and have these individual tasks here. And what I would suggest doing is you can actually take these as well, these checklist items, and you can actually convert these to cards. So instead of having these within this bigger card, now you can say, okay, we've got these other items here that we can use, or we have these other cards here that are definitely not more than 12 hours, and we can handle what's going on here a little bit easier. The other thing which is fun to do here is you can create labels. So let's say we have this entire team that's working here, and some people are in marketing, some people are in accounting. Like let's say if Don was in administration and I needed him to reschedule lunch delivery, I could actually create a label here that says admin, and now it's a little bit easier, and you can close it or open it like this. You can actually see across the board what different departments are taking care of what within the team itself. So that helps to be a little bit more organized. Like for me, develop graphics for slides, that would be a marketing thing. So I would assign myself, and then also I could put marketing here. Whoops. Pick a color first and then pick marketing. Okay. So this is where you want to get started, right? And this is the sprint itself. So when we're talking about the daily Scrum, which is going to happen every day, that's going to be, what did we do yesterday? What are we going to do today? And what is there anything in your way? So I'm going to share my Slack channel with you all. You should be seeing Slack now. Whoops. And this is a Slack board that I just created just to show you how this works today. So as you can see here in the middle, all I'm doing is updating everyone else on my team every morning with what's going on, what I did yesterday, what's going on today, and then what blockers I have, which I'm a big basketball fan, and I've had the blocker of watching ESPN and figuring out if Kevin Durant is going to play anytime soon, which it doesn't appear that that's the case. So that's a blocker, and this is just a fun example for today. But what's really fun is when you have, let's say you're a Scrum Master and you're the person who you want to alleviate these blockers, you can actually sync up Trello with Slack. And what's fun about this is once you link your Trello account, if you see here, these are all shortcuts that you can use to be able to have Slack immediately send over a card to Trello, which is pretty fun. So if I wanted to, if there was a impediment, something getting in my way of saying, oh, I didn't think about redesign or changing the time for lunch delivery today, I can actually change, I can put the impediment here in Slack, and then I can create a card. The Scrum Master can create a card instantly and say, okay, I need to do that. And so we don't have to write it in Slack and create a card in Trello separately. We can just do that within Slack. So there are lots of different ways you can do a daily Scrum. I would highly suggest if your entire remote team can do this together in a video session, that would be the ideal scenario. But if everyone can't get together all at the same time, just having it here with Slack is a great option. And the other thing that I like about this setup as well is that this allows you to be able to have these scrums and allow people to share. And if they're not all in the same room at the exact time, you can still share this kind of information. All right, let's hop back to the Trello board. I know we're getting close on time here. So going back to the sprint review, like we talked about before, this one's pretty easy. Just making sure that you set up that time, and you can really use this done column here to talk about what you've accomplished. And that's the whole point of this. So I got a conference room. Don came through with rescheduling lunch delivery. So instead of me taking an hour or two to say, this is what I did this week, you can simply just say, here's what we've got finished in the done column, and you can review that way, which saves a ton of time because once again, this meeting should only be about an hour to accomplish. And then lastly, the sprint retrospective, as I mentioned before, what did we do well, what didn't go well, and what actions do we need to fix what we're doing moving forward. Do this with video, and you want to make sure that you get as many members within your team to do this as possible. I love the idea of having members write down their thoughts on this within Slack first and then sharing it in video, because if somebody asks you a question and you have to be on the spot and talk in person, it can be a little bit challenging. And I think somebody mentioned earlier, it's hard for people to share sometimes about how they're feeling. And it's because they haven't really put together their thoughts yet. And so if you let people write these down ahead of time, these questions, and then be able to share, I think that's really, really important. And then lastly, the other thing I would say, and I mentioned this earlier, but be creative. Instead of saying we're going to always do this meeting on Monday morning to have sprint planning and then do the retrospective Friday at 4 o'clock, people might just be tired and not wanting to participate. And especially with remote teams, you're going to have to be creative with when you can have these sorts of meetings. So think about maybe starting your sprint on a Wednesday, ending it on a Tuesday. Just be creative with that and see what works. Okay, so it is already 1:01. I'm going to hop back to the regular slides. I have just a couple more I'd like to share, but we are just about done. Thank you for your patience. I got a little chatty today, so I ran a little long. So this is a huge takeaway from today. Scrum is lightweight and easy to understand, but it's difficult to master. And the reason why it's difficult to master is because it's just hard to be consistent with all of these different events that I mentioned here. So I know I threw a lot at you today, but I really want you to use this video replay and be able to reference it and say, oh, are we doing this? Are we doing this? Are we really covering all these events? And doing it in a way that's super easy to where not only can your existing team members thrive and continue to do it, but also bringing in new members of your team, they'll be able to thrive as well. So once again, Agile and Scrum are not silver bullets. If used properly, they can bring empowerment to teams, fuel constant iteration, and it fosters the idea of working out loud. Show the work that you're doing. Start incrementally and find out what works for you. These are just a few of the different courses that we offer. I was going to mention them a little bit more, but once again, we're getting a little bit behind on time. And then lastly, I do have this link I'd like to share with you. If you all would like to sign up for the next Slinkythink webinar, this is coming up in 2 weeks, and my professional better half, Christopher Daly, is going to be talking about SAFE, which is the Scaled Agile Framework. This is how you adopt Scrum amongst lots and lots and lots of different teams. And he's going to be talking about the ins and outs of it and whether or not it may be a good fit for your Agile teams. So that's going to do it for today. Thanks again for attending the hashtag Slinkythink Sessions Volume 7. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I will be sending you all the video replay here either by the end of the day or tomorrow. And that does it for this session. So on behalf of everybody at Be Life, stay agile, my friends, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you so much.